This is the Chapter 4 practice exercises starting with number 1, which are general journal entries. In most cases, when we're analyzing in our T accounts, as I mentioned earlier, that's not an official accounting form or anything. It's just a way for us to get used to analyzing the two sides in our head. So the general journal entry form, though, this is an official accounting form where you uh, journalize the transactions in debit and credit format. So you usually do the debit first and then the credit in this case. So this one's, of course, the first one is an invested cash in the business, $5,000. And so we know when we invest cash, we have more cash. So we would debit cash and we would credit our owner's capital account to add to our investment or net worth in our business. The next one, we paid office rent for $500. Anytime we have an expense involved, that's going to be a debit, unless you're closing it at the end of the month, which we'll get to later. But if you keep in mind right now, we're keeping a tally of all of our expenses for during the month, and it's a debit because it decreases the capital. And we assume, since they didn't say paid on account, that it is cash, so we would credit cash. Purchased office supplies on account for $300. In this case, we have more office supplies, which is an asset, so we increase it with a debit, and we're going to increase our accounts payable since we did that on account. So we will credit accounts payable since it's a liability. The next one is received cash for services rendered, so we debit our cash. Anytime it says received cash, we have more of that asset, cash, and we're going to credit our fees because that's how we earn our money, and that increases capital, so it is a credit balance account. So to increase it, we credit that account. Paid cash on account, $50, so we're going to debit accounts payable because we're decreasing that liability account, and we're going to credit cash because we're decreasing that liability account or that asset account. Rendered services on account. What that means is that we have customers or clients that are promising to pay us at a later date. So that's a receivable. We hope to receive that money. So we will debit that asset receivable and we will credit our fees since it does increase our owner's equity or our income. And the last one, received cash for an amount owed by a customer. So we're going to debit cash, and amount owed by a customer, we're going to credit accounts receivable. Okay, which decreases accounts receivable. So then we check our work. Okay, and once you've checked it, then you can submit your assignment. Okay, number 2. Okay, we're getting a little more formal with our accounting in this. We actually have a chart of accounts, which most accounting firms or most businesses do have a chart of accounts. You don't want to debit or credit something that's not on your chart of accounts. That makes no sense to do that. So Diane Bernick, she's opened Bernick's Consulting, and she wants to journalize the following transactions for the year using the following chart of accounts. And there's a general journal, like I said, looks more it looks more official. So Bernick invested cash in the business, $12,660. I'm going to click here, 12,660 while it's fresh in my mind, and I'm going to click here, and 12,660. We know they have to equal. And so here I would want cash, invested cash, and here I would want capital. And notice the credit is always indented. The debit is at the left margin. Okay, the next one, paid office rent, $746. So on this one, I'm going to debit rent expense, $760, I believe it was, $746. And I'm going to credit cash because that's what I paid for that. Okay, the next one, January 3rd, purchased office equipment on account, so the debit will be office equipment. And that amount was $1330. And it was on account, so I owe more money, so I'm going to go to accounts payable and $1330. On January the 5th, received cash for services rendered, $989. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there so I don't forget the amount. And it was received cash, so I'm going to debit cash, and it was for services rendered, or consulting fees is the name on our chart of accounts. On January the 8th, I paid telephone bill $79. So utilities expense, or telephone expense in this case, they have them separate. And every chart of accounts is a little bit different. Some companies have a lot of telephone expense, so they may want a special account for it like this one does. Other companies don't have much telephone expense, so they may not have a special account for it. Depends on how much the account would be used. Okay, the next one is paid for a magazine subscription, which is something that doesn't happen very often, so they just put it in miscellaneous expense for $23. And credit, we paid cash for it, $23. Okay, then we have to go to a new page. So on the next page for January 11th, purchased office supplies on account, $251. And it was on account, so we put accounts payable because we owe that at a later date. Okay, the next one, January 15th, and I'm sorry for all the scrolling. January 15th, made payment on account of $235. So we go to debit accounts payable, $235. And we credit cash because anytime you make a payment, it's going to be cash. Paid part-time employee on the 18th, $682. So on the 18th, wages expenses, $282. And that you paid cash to them, $282. On January 21st, received cash for services rendered, $790. So debit cash, $790. And it was for services rendered, which is our Fees are our consulting fees, is the name on the chart of accounts, $790. Then on the 25th, paid utilities bill, $107. So we go to utilities expense, $107. And we paid cash, $107. So we have a debit and a credit. Always want to be sure your debits equal your credits after every transaction. And on the 27th, the owner withdrew cash for personal use. So we go down here and we're going to debit her drawing account. And I've already forgotten the amount, $416. And cash, $416. Okay, then on the last one, paid part-time employee, $512. Wages expense, $512. And of course cash, $512. And check your work. And it looks like they're all right. So you've completed that one. You would want to submit your assignment. Couple of things. You're having to do a lot of scrolling on here. There are a couple of things that you can do to avoid that. One thing you can do is to print it out if you wanted to do that so that you could look at the transactions and stay at the bottom in the journal. Another thing that you could do if you had two screens, or even if you don't, you could probably do it on one screen. You may want to use the snipping tool. I have mine on the bottom of my screen. Click on it and I can actually snip this part of what I need on the screen so that I can have it over here on the side and see the bottom of the screen without having to scroll. And it may be smaller, but it works pretty well by doing it that way. Or if you have two screens, it works even better because you don't have to make it smaller. You can put one thing on one screen and one on the other. Just a couple of ideas if you're having trouble with the going back and forth, because it can cause you, if you're not careful, it can cause you to make errors in the numbers. So you don't want that to happen. End of this video.